Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got a solo episode, and boy, did I draw the short straw talking about this game. The number 3 Georgia Bulldogs fall 28-10 to the Ole Miss Rebels. A really poor performance, specifically on offense for the Bulldogs. So we're going to talk about this game. We'll invite the folks who are watching this live late Saturday night. If you got stuff you want to talk about in the comments, throw them in there. We're going to break down this game. We're going to talk about what's next for Georgia. We're going to talk about what was said in the post game by Kirby Smart and players, and talk a little bit about what this means for Georgia as it fights to keep its playoff hopes alive. Let's just start with the biggest issue for Georgia on Saturday, and it was the offense. Georgia only gains 245 yards of offense, only 69 in the first half. That 245 yards, the fewest amount of yards for Georgia in a game since the infamous 2017 loss at Auburn. That's the one that I believe Gus Malzahn talked about, beating the dog crap out of Georgia at the end of that game. 10 points, the fewest that Georgia has scored, tied for the fewest, I should say, that Georgia has scored in the Kirby Smart era. It was just an awful night on offense. I don't think you can kind of paper over it any other way. I think you got to kind of just break it down for what it was. First half, it just didn't seem like Georgia could run the ball very well. If I'm remembering correctly, they had something like 2.1 yards per carry in that first half. I think that was excluding some Carson Beck sacks. Second half, they moved the ball a lot better. But you had turnovers. The Nate Frazier fumble was just killer. Then you have a Carson Beck pick on a must-have fourth down, and then it was sort of adding insult to injury with Carson fumbling again. Georgia's offensive line, I think this is where it all starts. I know people are probably frustrated with how Carson Beck played. I really didn't think he played that poorly, especially compared to these last few weeks. I just think it starts up front. I think this offensive line is beat to hell, guys. I think this is a line that across the board is hurting. And you look at the situation on Saturday, Michael Morris does not play. You look at the fact that Tate Ratledge plays maybe 2 or 3 series, and then basically he realizes, I'm not good enough to go tonight. He comes out. They kind of play musical chairs with Xavier Truss moving inside to guard. They move going back and forth. Drew Bobo got in some. This offensive line is just down bad, hurting, trying to get through this season. I think everybody on that line is really banged up. And I think you kind of saw that in a number of ways. If you follow me on Twitter, I was really frustrated with how much Georgia tried to lean on the screen game and trying to just bust screens open, especially as this game got really out of hand. Again, Georgia's lucky it only lost this game 28-10. It did not feel that close. And they, credit to the Georgia defense for forcing several field goals, for just trying to give its counterpoints on offense a chance. And the offense just couldn't take advantage. But, that first half to me was like, can't run the ball, just really struggling to sustain anything. Defense holds. Then you go to the third quarter. Georgia has a really nice drive to open, and then you have to settle for a field goal, which I understood at the time. I think that was the right decision. I think that made it like 16-10. If you don't kick there, you're going to – I don't know. I think it just made sense there to make it a 6-point game. But then you just have you have the fumble, you have the interception. And by the probably late third quarter, the start of the fourth quarter, that offensive line just was gassed. You could see it. They couldn't protect Carson Beck. Carson winds up being sacked 5 times in this loss. And I think the strangest thing about this game is the fact that the way it opened set up for a certain type of game. And then what actually happened was basically a 180. And you look at the opening drive Ole Miss gets the ball, you know, two plays that really go nowhere. Jackson Dart throws across the middle. Dan Jackson intercepts it. Not only does that give Georgia fantastic field position, but Jackson Dart gets hurt on that play. And you kind of go, oh, this sets up really well for Georgia. And to Georgia's credit, it immediately takes advantage, has a really nice drive. They wind up finding the end zone. And I mean, as soon as that happened, Nate Frazier scores the opening touchdown. I'm kind of thinking that this sort of looks like a situation where it could look a lot like last year's game where I think it was 52-17. I mean, just Georgia blew the brakes off of them. And to Ole Miss's credit, they didn't let that happen. And probably more so than anything, they battled through Jackson Dart leaving the game. He heads to the locker room. Austin Simmons comes in. And Austin Simmons, I sort of almost wondered, like, are they going to have no choice but to keep Austin Simmons in this game? Because he came out, led them right down the field, and they scored. And then Jackson Dart comes back, and his numbers. It's kind of funny, especially usually we do these instant reactions right after the game. We're now a few hours removed. For those who are listening to this on the pod, it is about 12:45 a.m. Eastern time. I'm recording in Birmingham. We kind of split the drive back in half, going a good ways on Saturday night. But looking at the numbers now that I've had kind of more time, you're like, Jackson Dart only threw for 199 yards, had a touchdown, had that interception, but it just felt like he was dialed in, and he gave Ole Miss what they had to have, even when the biggest run threat was Jackson Dart, which it bore out in the numbers: 8 carries, 50 yards. He broke a 28-yard run at one point, and this is a team that didn't have its leading rusher. Trey Harris didn't play in this game. Again, to me, it's all about this offense. The offensive line is banged up. They never could really get much going. And then when they were moving the ball in that second half, they just found ways to get in their own way. Not only were those turnovers, there were drops. They had a stat today I was not aware of that, to me, is the most damning of this entire season for Georgia. That Georgia had surpassed UAB for the most drop passes this season. And for those of you who do not watch very much UAB football, UAB is bad. A lot of people think that Trent Dilfer is probably a few weeks away from being fired, and you got UAB, who is not good, and they don't have as many drops as a team that some consider to be still in the driver's seat to win the national title, and that just kind of says all there is to say. Again, I didn't think Carson Beck played that poorly. People were really frustrated about a shot of him smiling on the sideline at the end. I'll shout out Athens Banner Herald's Mark Weiser. He got a chance as the interviews were ended today to ask Carson, hey, what happened there? And I would encourage you guys to go read Mark's story because Mark got the question in. But basically, Carson explained he and Jaden Rashada were sitting there, and basically that Jaden was kind of talking him up, like, hey, we got to battle through this, that sort of thing. And, that we need to go make plays or whatever it was. And Carson was kind of like, yeah, that's right. And Carson's just in a situation where he can't win there. When you're a quarterback of a team that is struggling like Georgia has been lately, where it seems like, especially, I didn't think this was the case tonight, but in recent weeks, Carson it's been like every step he takes the wrong step. And so, he's been under a microscope. And again, that's sort of par for the course. That's what you sign up for, being an SEC starting quarterback and, taking the reins at Georgia. So I get fans are frustrated. I get fans that want to see that. I think it's a big to do about nothing. I don't think Carson was the problem tonight. But I think there was plenty on offense that has to be cleaned up. Talking on defense, they deserve a lot of credit. I know 28 points sounds like a lot. but they continued to hold and hold. They continued to force field goals to keep the offense with a chance. And it just became clear as that game went on that the offense was never going to take advantage of it. And Caden Davis wound up kicking 5 field goals. He's got to be the favorite to be the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week for his performance, and had a 53-yarder. That's when I knew that um, Ole Miss was in a good position. Was he hit a 53-yarder with about 3 minutes left before a halftime, and it made it 16-7. But I was like, yeah, maybe they should go for this. That you had the weather going on. Should they just take the points and give Lane Kiffin credit? He trusted his kicker, and Caden Davis hit it, and with room to spare, that probably was good from at least 60. So it's just a situation where you got outplayed, you got outcoached. It was an L across the board. Again, the defense wasn't great, wasn't perfect, but gave you opportunities to keep you in the game and keep you in the game. And the offense just, they didn't have it. And I'll be fascinated to see what we hear in the next few days as this team gets ready to host Tennessee, a Tennessee team that I think more than likely is probably looking at being number 5 in this upcoming playoff ranking. But, looking through some of the stats from Saturday's loss, Ole Miss only had 397 yards of offense, Georgia 245. Carson Beck, 20 of 31, 186 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. No touchdowns again. It seems like that's happened quite a few times. Nate Frazier leads the way rushing wise, 12 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. Trevor Etienne, 6 carries, 24 yards. Kirby said that rib injury that he's sustaining against Florida is still bothering him. The receivers, I'm just looking at these receiving numbers, and they are leave a lot to be desired. Dominic Lovett, 4 receptions for 41 yards. Cash Jones, 3 receptions, 33 yards. Dylan Bell, 3 receptions, 33 yards, I should say. Arian Smith, 3 receptions, 32 yards. He had a few other guys get involved, 8 receivers in total catching the ball. This situation, I'll have a column on Sunday talking about what the offense needs to do next. And we're going to see on next Saturday against Tennessee, what exactly they can do. And I think that's the thing that if you're a Georgia fan, that this should worry you the most, is that I don't know what they can do at this point, because I really think a lot of the situation, a lot of the issues stem from they are super banged up. They are really, really hurt. Again, especially at the offensive line. So they've got stuff they got to clean up and do it in a hurry. And it's either try to get guys healthy. Kirby talks all the time about, the biggest thing that sets you up to play well is to practice well. And there's guys that just haven't been able to practice. He said that Tate Ratledge hadn't practiced all week, and then he has to play with Michael Morris unavailable. He said Trevor Etienne was limited this week, and he tried to play, but wasn't feeling 100%. So, looking at this and kind of looking at it big picture when it comes to this Georgia team, I think they're still in good position to make the playoff. ESPN had a graphic toward the end of that telecast that Georgia still has like a 72% chance of making the playoff. And I think if they beat Tennessee in Athens next week, that, they're not locked in, but they are in really good position with UMass and Georgia Tech left, that you'd say, yeah, that they're going to be able to make the playoff. But you have no margin for error, at least with what's left of the regular season. And this is a Tennessee team, we'll see. I think that the expectation is Nico will be able to play next week. He had left that Mississippi State game early. Tennessee won that game 33-14. But I believe afterwards, Josh Heupel said that he was expecting that Nico will be able to come back. They were banged up. It's a situation where you got to win that game. And the thing that is going to decide if you win this game or not is how well you block because of how good this Tennessee defensive line has been. So it's one of those things where if Georgia loses next week, it has nobody to blame for itself if it gets shut out of the college football playoff. You're talking about a team that would have lost 3 games. I see someone watching on Facebook says Dogs will be lucky if they stay in the top 10. I think as far as the college football playoff rankings, they're probably looking at like 9 and 10, somewhere in that range, and probably seeing Ole Miss jump them. And I think that's fair. I mean, Ole Miss dominated Georgia, and they deserve it. And Georgia's at a spot where, the good thing is you still have a chance, and it may wind up working out in your favor, especially for a team that is so banged up that maybe you're better off not playing in the SEC title game just for a perspective and for an opportunity to get healthy. One less game you have to play with a really beat up team, especially on the offensive line and on the offense as a whole. So, it's one of those that we were not expected. I did not think, under any circumstances that Ole Miss was going to beat Georgia by 18. And I want to be clear because I've said it a few times on this podcast. I think it should have been worse than that. And it definitely did not feel that close. And I know that a story I'll have at some point, probably on Monday, was Georgia's players talking about what it was like, having the field stormed around them as they're trying to get off. And not so much from a danger perspective, but like Georgia's not used to this. If I'm not mistaken, like LSU 2019 is the last time that an opponent has stormed the field after beating Georgia, just because it doesn't happen very often. It's mostly Alabama neutral site games, and we've seen some other losses along the way, but what we saw on Saturday, we're just not used to seeing. And it's a situation where Georgia's got to figure out some things, and it's a situation where Kirby Smart may have to make some tough decisions going forward. But they've got to get things started. I think it all starts with the offensive line. Again, I didn't think Carson played that poorly. I think that some of the criticism, some of it's warranted, some of it's not. But they're in a bad spot offensively, and they got to get in a good spot or a halfway decent spot before Tennessee comes to town, because of what Tennessee can do, especially on defense and some of the challenges that they'll present. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit just about the SEC, the rest of the country, where Georgia fits again in this playoff picture, and then look ahead a little bit to Tennessee. Well, yeah, guys, if you are watching this live, throw in the comments. I see several that I will get to in a few minutes. But, looking at this around the SEC, this was definitely the most surprising outcome on Saturday. Looking at some of the other scores, Texas just absolutely dominated Florida 49-17. South Carolina with a really nice 28-7 road win over Vanderbilt. Tennessee, as I mentioned earlier, 33-14. Mississippi State. I will be very interested Sunday and Monday going into this week, just sort of seeing the health of this Tennessee team, because just what little I watched as we were traveling, trying to get back. Now, is game day going to be there? Kirk said, see you in Athens Saturday. Yeah, we were talking about this. There is a pretty good chance that College game day will be there for that game. But Tennessee, man, it looked like they were in a war with Mississippi State. Had some guys get banged up, Nico among them. So I'll be interested to see how they do in that one. Alabama just absolutely takes it to LSU, 42-13. I think that pretty much puts LSU out of the hunt, 6-3. Big win for Alabama. And, it's getting tied atop the SEC. It's a situation where, again, I don't think Georgia's necessarily eliminated from the SEC title game contention, but they're in a bad spot having taken that loss. With Alabama having a tiebreaker, Ole Miss having a tiebreaker, and who knows how many tiebreakers it's going to come down to. But again, I don't think it's necessarily woe is me and gloom and doom if Georgia doesn't go to Atlanta. To have one less game on you and to have a week to kind of regroup and try to get healthy, I think that's really it's really important. Only other SEC game, Missouri 30-23 over a bad Oklahoma team. I don't think that necessarily has anything, nothing big to make out of that game. Some of the other games of note, Georgia Tech upsetting Miami. That was definitely a huge blow to the Hurricanes. I'll be really interested to see how far they fall. And again, it makes for an interesting sort of setup with how high does Tennessee climb, where Miami falls, where Georgia falls. If Ole Miss, sort of the Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama of it all, where they are in this latest college football playoff ranking and what that looks like getting ready for the rest of this regular season. Some of the other games, Ohio State 45-0 over Purdue. Just scrolling through these, 20-15 Indiana, 10-0, sitting pretty. Still going to have to play Ohio State, I believe. If that's not in the Big Ten championship game. No, they got Ohio State. They got a bye week, and then they play Ohio State. So I imagine that might be a college game day game and an opportunity there. Clemson, I know they're kind of farther out, but they're still trying to keep their hopes alive. Kind of a slow start against Virginia Tech. They win 24-14. Oregon takes care of business against a bad Maryland team, 39-18. Notre Dame took it to a 1-9 Florida State. I still can't get over that, 52-3. So again, mentioned to Penn State 35-6 over Washington. That's a pretty impressive win. Washington's not a playoff contender, but they're a solid team. So to see that Penn State, I think is you're probably looking at Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Tennessee. Those are probably your top four. Georgia, I would say, is probably 9-10. And again, I know folks are frustrated, but they're still sitting pretty. Again, I think the stat ESPN showed was 72% chance to make the playoff. They're still kind of controlling their own destiny, but you got to beat Tennessee. And there's a lot working against Georgia when it comes to this offense, when it comes to injuries. And you got to find a way probably to make Nico uncomfortable. I think we are going to see him just based on what we know at this point. You've got to do a better job pass rushing because they got after Jackson Dart on that first drive on Saturday. And I kind of felt like that was it after that. And he moved well. He was able to extend plays. He was able to take off. You can't let a good quarterback do that, or you'll see that kind of outcome that Jackson Dart had and what the Rebels were able to do. Go through some of the comments of the folks watching. People frustrated with Carson Beck. Again, I didn't really think that Carson was that bad. I've been one. I felt like I really defended Carson Beck. Texas game, I was like, oh, that was off. Florida game, it was just like, okay, this is totally on you. You did not play well. And to Carson's credit, I think he has owned that. He did against the Florida, following the Florida game. And, I didn't think they made any excuses in the post game tonight. Not prepared. I mean, the offense just really struggled. Need to go to the portal for some receivers. Some of the drops have just been brutal. And, I didn't think Carson let it look like it affected him. And I don't know that it did, but you can't really blame him if it did, if you're throwing passes and you're just wondering, well, I hope this guy catches this ball. One of the people on Facebook, for whatever reason, I apologize, folks. It is just showing that they're coming from Facebook. I can't see who's saying this. Carson made good decisions throwing the ball away tonight. I almost feel like he was too careful He could have taken a deep shot to Arian. I'd have to go back and look at some of the plays, and I'll have my rewatch story as usual. But he didn't force a ton of throws. I can't really think off the top of my head of seeing anything where I was like, oh, that was almost a pick, other than the interception, which got tipped. And he had a shot at connecting with Dominic Lovett on that play and gets tipped. The ball gets intercepted. Play calling stinks. I didn't. I think it was more Mike Bobo working with what he had, because I think I mentioned this earlier in this episode. I was critical as it was happening, some of the screens and the reliance on screens, but I think they got to a point where they were just like, we can't get anything going. We can't protect Carson Beck, who again was sacked 5 times. This is the only thing we got to do. Yeah, game day will be interesting because it's sort of strange to be hosting game day after that kind of shellacking on the road. But, this is a Georgia team that people are really excited about. And this is a team that had high expectations, and they're playing a really good Tennessee team. And I think they want to see what they can do at home. It's sort of been a strange season with just the amount of road games and what has happened and what has transpired from almost losing at Kentucky and then coming back against Alabama, but not being able to finish the job, and then not playing really great in Florida. And then you turn around and there's no world where the way Georgia played today was good enough to win, and they didn't. And they're lucky they only lost by 18. Someone in the comments says Georgia fans are spoiled since 2 championships, so unusual to see them play awful these last few games. I get the frustration. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is like, yeah, we all expected this team to be better. I had this team going 11-1 and was sort of sitting there thinking, am I grading too harsh? Should they be a 12-0 favorite? Understanding how hard that is to do. And it's just a team that it just feels like I made this comparison at one point. I think it might have been before the Texas game, just talking about because Texas was such an overwhelming favorite going into that game that it felt like this Georgia team was like the kid in school. I feel like a lot of us had this friend where it was like he didn't really try really hard. He was smart, but just wouldn't really apply himself. And it's like if you would just apply yourself, Georgia, think about how good you could be. You just got to apply yourself. That's what it feels like this team has been. That it's just like the parts you look on this team across the board should be playing better than they have. And, they've lost guys to injury. They've lost, think about the receivers with Ra Thomas and Colby Young. Those were guys that they both expected. They expected both of those guys to be big contributors. And, Rara wasn't on this team at all once the season started. And Colby only played 5 games. He could be coming back for Tennessee. We'll see what happens there. But, I mean, he's missed basically half of the season. A lot has happened, and then a lot of things just haven't gone to plan. And the good thing, again, for Georgia is that they're still in a position where they can make the college football playoff, and we could be talking about a situation where they figure out how to get things cleaned up and do it in the right time. But it's not going to be easy. And again, I'll have a column, as I mentioned earlier, on Sunday. You're trying to find answers where it's just not easy. There's not just very obvious, well, you can do this, well, you can do that. And again, I say that the problem is they are really beat up. And, are you talking about putting a guy like Daniel Calhoun, a true freshman, in on the offensive line? Are you talking about really making radical changes, moving guys around, trying to get other people involved? Robert Mayfield on YouTube, I think this was a very good summation of what this game was. Ole Miss was the better team this afternoon, straight up. Dominant D-line, versatile offense, and better coaching. Robert Mayfield says he's not a homer. I mean, I would totally agree. There is no area where you would say that Georgia was better than Ole Miss, and it showed up with how the game played out. Georgia was not able to move the ball. Georgia shot itself in the foot a few times with penalties that the few times you saw Georgia make a play on offense, it felt like, oh, it's coming back. And, it just defense had its moments, but couldn't get enough stops and definitely couldn't get enough pressure as that game wore on. Ole Miss deserved to win that game. They deserved to win by more than they did. And Georgia's got to shake this thing off because, as helpful as it is to have that road slate that they were playing done for, only playing at home for the next 3 weeks for you in the regular season, you got Tennessee coming to town, and they want to beat Georgia badly, not only to help their college football playoff hopes, but to probably knock Georgia out if Georgia were to lose that game. So that's going to be a big game. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. I believe that will be an ABC telecast. And as someone mentioned, I'm pretty sure this will be the college game day game. So a lot of tension on this game as usual. Well, we will wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate everyone who tuned in, especially a lot later than we usually do these. I appreciate the patience. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Again, we will have more episodes to come. I'll have Kip and Ben on with me on Tuesday, and we'll get their thoughts. And again, a lot of content out of today. I know these stories are always the ones that as readers you don't want to read, but I think there's a lot of good intel and thoughts from Kirby Smart and thoughts from Carson Beck and some of the defensive players on what went wrong, what needs to be cleaned up, and what Georgia wants to do when they return to the field on Saturday against the Volunteers. So we'll wrap it up right there. We'll wrap it up right there. I appreciate everyone who tuned in. Go to Dogs 24/7. Go to our YouTube. Go to our TikTok. And looking forward to seeing how this team responds and seeing how they turn the attention to another big SEC game and see if they show up ready to play on Saturday night. We'll finish it up right there. Until next time, take care, everybody.